And we go back to PricewaterhouseCoopers in their 2015 report, and we see that the median damages award stays fairly steady over the last 20 years. And you can see that, in fact, when you break down the last 20 years into 4 segments, 4 or 5-year segments, the trend is going down since the high water mark in 2000 to 2004, which is about the time that the Federal Circuit started paying much closer attention to how damages are awarded in the United States. Now, when you dig through the numbers, there are some very interesting things that you can find. One of them is that damages for NPEs are bucking this trend. Damages for NPEs are actually still very high, and they're higher than the kind of damages that competitors are getting in competitive litigation. And some people see these numbers and they're a little bit shocked, because non-practicing entities are not traditionally the kind of patentees that are supposed to be rewarded under the patent system. And anyone who does a lot of litigation, patent litigation, can tell you the most hotly contested cases are not between NPEs and practicing companies. They're between practicing companies fighting for the same market share. So the most hard-fought litigations I've ever been involved in always involve competitor cases. So practicing entities versus practicing entities. Those are the cases that don't settle. Those are the cases that, in my experience, tend to have larger damages awards, but this statistic shows otherwise. But I'm going to tell you why I think the statistic shows otherwise, and it's really not surprising. When I have a client come in and say, my competitor is infringing my patents, I want you to stop it, that client is usually coming into my office just after the infringement begins, right? That product hits the market, it starts taking customers away from my client. My client wants that to stop right away. In the United States, if you're going to get an injunction, you're not going to get an injunction unless you sue right away. If you let the infringer continue to take market share from you, even if you win the case, when it's all over, the judge is going to go, well, what took you so long? Why did it take you so long to file suit? I'm not going to give you an injunction because obviously you could live with the amount of harm that this person's causing. They'll pay you damages, but I'm not going to give you an injunction. So when a competitor sees its competition being harmed by an infringer, it acts early. And it acts early in a way that minimizes the amount of damages. The cases that I work on between competitors, we're not fighting about damages for the most part. Yes, they want as many damages as they want, but what's more important is the injunction. What's not shown in any of these damages are some of the most hard-fought cases in the U.S. between generic pharmaceutical companies and name-brand pharmaceutical companies. Those cases, I've seen some of those cases generate attorney's fees of $60, $70 million. Those are the hardest fought cases in the United States. They don't fight over damages. There are no damages in an ANDA case, in a new drug application case between a name-brand pharmaceutical and a generic. The entire fight is over the injunction. And again, the injunction doesn't happen unless you sue early. Now, let's talk about the incentive of the non-practicing entity. Ever since eBay came out from the Supreme Court in the United States, non-practicing entities are not likely to get injunctions. So that's a big club that's been taken out of the hands of the NPE. So what can they do? A lot of NPEs sit back and wait and let the damages start building up over years, because that's the only way they're going to make any money out of the patent infringement litigation. And what's strange, in the United States, we have what we call a marking statute. And perversely, the marking statute punishes people who practice their own patents in a way that it doesn't punish non-practicing entities. So what the marking statute says is, if you are practicing your own patent, you're not allowed to get past damages unless you've marked your products with the patent number or provided specific notice to the alleged infringer. That's the only way you're going to get any past damages. But you know what? Those rules don't apply to non-practicing entities. Non-practicing entities don't have to give any warning. They don't have to mark anything with their patent on their products or anything because they don't have products. So they can walk up to you, show you the patent, and say, guess what? Your last 6 years of sales are at risk here. And so that's why non-practicing entity awards are bigger. Not because juries like them any better, but just because they let the damages build up in a way that practicing entities can't afford to do. Oh, and one more thing. Non-practicing entities, you know who they tend to sue? Apple, Microsoft, Qualcomm, the most successful companies with the biggest pockets and the most amount of money to give in a damages award. If you're an unsuccessful company, you're not going to get sued by an NPE. Congratulations. It also makes a big difference what kind of technology, and in Dean Liu's presentation earlier this morning, he showed this briefly, and it makes a big difference what technology you're in. In the biotech pharma area, damages tend to be bigger than in the automotive area. Telecommunications is a big area, but you know what? That number is skewed a little bit because of Apple, Samsung, HTC. There are some big companies and big damages awards in those cases. Medical devices. Wolfgang talked yesterday about even in Germany, medical devices tend to get a very high royalty rate. Well, the same is true in the United States. Some of these inventions are literally life-saving devices, and the patentees rightly ask for a lot of money in those cases. But so your perception of whether the United States patent system is out of control, I think, depends on what you're doing. And in fact, whenever Congress takes up the idea of patent reform, the companies where I live in Silicon Valley near San Francisco, California, it's a technology economy very similar to what you have here in Hsinchu. A lot of semiconductor companies, a lot of software companies, a lot of computer companies, a lot of telecom companies who tend not to like patents. I have a feeling that the people of Hsinchu are not very fond of patents in the United States. Well, you have friends in Silicon Valley who feel the same way, but you know what? On the other side of the country, where the pharmaceutical companies tend to be concentrated in Delaware and New Jersey and Pennsylvania, they love patents. They are still big supporters of the patent system. So anytime Congress takes up the cause of patent reform, it's usually a California congresswoman or congressman leading the charge, and they're immediately stopped by the northeastern congresspeople because even within the United States, there's a vast difference in how people view patents, and all the difference depends on what kind of industry you work in. So this is the basic statute for damages. This is from 1952. It was introduced in its current form probably in 1946. And in 1946 is when Congress eliminated the infringer's profits as a measure of damages. We talked about this yesterday. Why did the United States eliminate the infringer's profits as a measure of damages? Well, there are a couple reasons. One is, as we heard from our friends from Japan and Germany and Taiwan, it's a really hard way to calculate damages. Frankly, it doesn't seem that much more difficult to me than the way lost profits and reasonable royalties are calculated now in the United States. But back in 1946, Congress thought it was too complicated to punish infringers by taking away their profits. The other problem was there was an economic movement among the intelligentsia in the United States, the university professors and the economists who were advising Congress, that you didn't want to punish the most productive members of your society. And so if an infringer is out there making a lot of money by infringing, well, you want to stop the infringing. But you want to punish only the infringement. You don't want to punish the economically successful person because of their economic success independent of the infringement. And they found that that was almost impossible to do under the system. So what they decided to do, in the spirit of what the patent laws were, at least in the United States, intended to do, make the patent owner whole, put the patent owner in the position they would have been if there wasn't any infringement. They decided to focus on what the patent owner lost rather than what the infringer gained. And so we'll talk a little bit later about lost profits. If the patent owner was a practicing entity and lost profits because of the infringement, they want to make them whole, but they don't want to punish the infringer beyond what's necessary to make the patent owner whole. Or what would they have reached in a negotiation for a reasonable royalty? So in both those situations, you focus more on what the patent owner lost rather than what the infringer gained. And that's a philosophical view that the United States has as a policy matter on damages. Now, there were two points that the other two, actually, everybody else talked about this morning, so I will touch on them briefly, which is the extraterritoriality aspect of U.S. law, which, by the way, maybe in the future we should have a seminar on territoriality issues, because I found the discussion this morning fascinating in how different countries view it. And again, I think there is a fundamental philosophical difference in the way the United States looks at this issue and the rest of the world looks at this issue. For a method claim, if any step of a method claim is performed outside of the United States, contrary to Germany, Wolfgang talked earlier about if a method that's performed by a computer server is being performed in Hungary or Taiwan or China, but is being used by people in Germany, that the person controlling that server is going to owe damages in Germany. They won't owe damages in the United States. The law is clear that a method claim in the United States can only be infringed if every single step is performed in the United States. So if you want to infringe a method patent using a computer server, just park your computer server across the border in Vancouver, Canada, and you can infringe in the United States all you'd like with impunity. But before you get any bad ideas, if the claim is to a system, if the claim is to a system that includes a server, then it's a more complicated analysis. And what the courts look at in that situation is the system being operated, put into service in a way that's intended to benefit users in the United States? So the United States has this very odd mechanistic, it's not equity. It has nothing to do with fairness. It's a very mechanistic approach to extraterritoriality, and whether a system claim or a method claim are infringed are very different things in the United States. The other thing is on induced infringement. The other difference is on induced infringement. In the United States, the induced infringer is liable to the same extent as all the direct infringers. So the classic example of this is, I'm going to talk later about a case between Power Integrations and Fairchild. And that may be, that case was probably in the news in Taiwan because Power Integrations is so aggressive with its patents that they've come after a number of Taiwanese companies as well. But Power Integrations sued Fairchild not so much for what Fairchild was doing in the United States, because Fairchild doesn't make its products in the United States. Fairchild doesn't even import its own products into the United States. What Fairchild does is it makes the products here in Taiwan, I think, and China, and then sells them to distributors, independent companies. And then those independent companies sell, these are chips that are used in power supplies, so that the same power supply can be used in Taiwan, where you have 110 volt, like in America, right, 110 volt. But it can also be used in Europe, where they use 220 volts. So without these chips in it, your phone would blow up because you'd have too much power if you went to Europe and tried to plug it into the wall. So these power supply chips control the amount of energy going into the phone. So these distributors buy the product from Fairchild and then sell the product to cell phone manufacturers, most significantly Samsung. Samsung's not an American company either. Samsung's in Korea, and the phones are assembled in China. The chargers are assembled in China and then imported into the United States. Now, Power Integrations could sue Samsung for all that infringement that's being done in the United States. And it would probably be easier to sue Samsung because for induced infringement, we talked earlier this morning, my colleagues talked about the intents of the infringer in the United States. The intent of the infringer for direct infringement makes no difference in the United States. You can think you're entirely innocent and you're still liable for direct infringement. But for induced infringement, for contributory infringement, you need to have intent to infringe, which is higher than negligence. We talk about negligence in Japan, negligence in Germany. Negligence in the United States doesn't make you liable for induced infringement. It's a very high level. You have to know about the patent, and you have to know that you're infringing the patent in order to be found liable for induced infringement. That's a very high standard. But Power Integrations is still not going to sue Samsung. You know why? Samsung's its biggest customer. You're not going to sue your biggest customer for patent infringement. So what do? But you want their business, so you sue their suppliers. In the United States, if Power Integrations is successful against Fairchild or against any other company that's selling to Samsung, the court is going to look at how much harm Samsung caused Power Integrations in the United States by importing others' chips in their products, and they're going to make Fairchild pay for it. That's how it works in the United States. If there's direct infringement and induced infringement, both parties are on the hook for the entire amount of damages. So it's very useful in the situation that Power Integrations does it because you don't have to sue your customer. It's very useful in, for example, a consumer product where you have a method of using a cell phone or a method of taking a medication. You're not going to go out and sue every patient in America because I'll tell you, you're going to have a really bad PR problem on your hand if you do that. But you can go after the pharmaceutical company that's supplying that drug to all those patients. It's cheaper because you only have to sue one company instead of hundreds of thousands or maybe even millions of customers. And you are entitled to complete recovery in that situation. So those are two significant differences in induced infringement and extraterritoriality damages that I thought I would mention because I was fascinated by